Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about the demonic realm, some of the experiences I've had in the past working with demons, and why I will never work with demons again. The reasons why. I'm not going to go near that energy again, and I would not recommend working with demons. So there are obviously forces out there that don't want me to make this video. I've already had things happening to me over the last few days to try and prevent me or put obstacles in the way of me doing this video. So I've come to expect it now. I've got a lot of spiritual protection. I've got Michael with me. I've got Saint Joseph with me. So hopefully I'll be able to get through this without too many glitches or anything going wrong. I feel like it's in a way unavoidable for me to make this video for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because a lot of the topics I cover come from the Golden Dawn. They come from the Western esoteric tradition, which involves a lot of grimoires, a lot of demonology. Particularly, you think of the Goetia and the 72 demons of the Goetia. It's kind of a glaring omission for me to not talk about this topic, given what else I talk about, but there's a good reason for it. Which I'll get to. But the other reason why I kind of felt it's time to talk about this is because increasingly, as you look on social media, particularly Instagram, it seems to be coming into fashion to really work with demons and do sigils to demons and ask demons for things. The people that are sort of promoting this don't seem to be fully aware of the dangers that can come with working with demons. So that's something I wanted to make you very aware of in this video. As to why working with demons has become more popular in recent times, I think that the answer is obvious. I think that our culture itself has become more demonic. You look at the sort of the modern statues that are being built. You look at what gets put in music videos for very mainstream acts. Satanic imagery is being pushed heavily absolutely everywhere. It's like the powers that control this world aren't trying to hide who they are anymore. So since no time like ever before in the history of Western society, since the days of paganism at the height of its debauchery, have we been so susceptible to the influence of demonic forces, which is why it's all the more critical to know why we should avoid them and why they can be such a negative influence on our lives. If you follow my channel, you'll see that I've done a previous video on what are angels and demons. I can link that in the description below if you find it helpful. But suffice to say, I'm not going to comment on exactly what the demons are, but what I can relay is that there are these forces that work through the lowest levels of human psychology, which seem to work through nature in some way, which have some mysterious element to them, seem to be moved by some kind of intelligence, and I can give you my experience of that, how I experienced those forces, which often get labeled as demonic or negative, but that's about all I can really tell you about the nature of these beings. So in the context of occultism and esotericism, why would somebody work with demons in the first place? Well, there's a couple of reasons why people get into this sort of thing. The first reason is because of the distinction between, say, high magic on the one hand and practical magic on the other. Whereas high magic is all about communicating with higher intelligences and reforming ourselves spiritually through some kind of experience, such as during Enochian rituals or during the Abramelin operation, for example. There's other forms of magic which are all about getting things. I want more money, or I want to find love, or I want to be successful in life, or something like that. And so for those sorts of things, you need a different kind of magic, a practical magic. And more often than not, in the Western esoteric tradition, it's utilizing demonic forces, which is the most common way of engaging in practical magic. There are sort of angels that can do that as well, but in my experience, it's not as effective going to angels, because just as a type of an intelligence, they're much more focused on lifting us up than keeping us stuck in the material. So that means they can be not as reliable in getting things as, say, calling up a demon. The other reason why people are drawn to summoning demons and working with demons is just an element of antinomianism and rebelliousness against Christianity. A lot of people, myself included, were raised as Christians. In my case, I was raised Catholic, and over the course of our lives, particularly in adolescence, we start to see religious authority as something very oppressive, and there's a point at which we rebel against that. And the obvious way of expressing a rebellion against Christianity is to look towards the demonic realm. Never mind that the religious authorities that you're rebelling against may be hypocrites and actually represent a corruption or even an inversion of the true message of Christ. From a superficial standpoint, it can seem like the most obvious way of being oppositional towards those religious authorities is by jumping into the world of the demonic and dealing with the world of the demonic, particularly since through philosophies such as Luciferianism and the like, Satan is recast as a revolutionary and a liberator who wants to advance the freedom of the human race from the oppression of God. And that's kind of a fallacy for reasons which I explained actually in my recent video on the Major Arcana when I'm discussing the Devil card. The supposed freedom that we get from expressing our every impulse is actually a form of enslavement of our spiritual nature to the physical. But it can seem like exploring demonolatry and demonology is somehow freeing or liberating from the oppressive restrictions of the mainstream churches. So that can be what sort of draws people to these forms of spiritual practice. So there have been times in my life where I have worked with demons. I've worked with the Goetia, and I've got results, and I've actually succeeded in calling a presence into the room which can be described as demonic. So what are these beings like? Well, I've never physically seen anything, but it definitely manifests as like a presence. And it's got its own sort of character, it's got its own sort of personality. Whereas encountering an angelic presence, you get a real sense of grace and holiness. The energy of demonic entities is a lot denser, it's a lot more sort of gritty and grimy and shady feeling. And a lot more, almost you could say, animalistic feeling. It's like you're dealing with an underworld figure. In the human world, someone who you would communicate with, who's a bit dodgy when you need something that you're not supposed to have, and that comes at a price, and you can be easily betrayed because of the poor moral character of the individual that you're dealing with, and that the lack of accountability in that environment, given that it's so hidden away from anything that can see the light of day. So you get that same sort of shady feeling from these demonic entities. I suppose there's a reason why the world of organized crime is called the underworld in our society, in our modern vernacular, because it's as above, so below. Just as we have an underworld of the spiritual realm, we have an expression of that in the underworld of our human material world. And the two realms are very similar and operate in a very similar fashion. And as I said, there's kind of an animalistic element to this as well. The way that the demons behave is very much like an impulse-driven wild animal, which has a nature that can turn at any moment if it feels like it's too attacked or it feels like it's drawn towards something. very wild kind of a nature and a very unpredictable nature, which needs to be kept in check quite frequently. My understanding of these beings, these entities, has changed over the years as I've become more familiar with them. As I've had time to try and form relationships with them and observe how they treat those relationships and what agenda they're really following, I've got a much better understanding of them, which I'll get to. Suffice to say, I've realized that they're a much more negative force and a much more insidious force than I had even imagined when I was younger. So what sort of different ways are there of working with these demonic entities? Well, there's really two main ways that I can think of. The first is the sort of traditional way that they've been dealt with since medieval times, which is this kind of grimoire-based magic, which is very steeped still in the sort of traditions of the Abrahamic religions. The prime example of this would be the Goetia, and the whole premise of the Goetia is based upon the books of the Old Testament, where King Solomon builds the temple in Jerusalem, and there's an old legend that Solomon commanded demons in order to help with the construction of that temple. So it's all about calling upon the power of God in order to command spirits which are more low-ranking, because that's how things sort of work in the great chain of being. And so by using the right formulas, by using the right God names, you can command the demon to serve even godly purposes. But the demon is very much submissive to your will, doesn't have its own agency. And that's something which people have criticized as well, that if these things really are sentient beings, then we shouldn't be forcing them to submit to us in this way. In this form of magic, there has been, there is a lot of protection. There's usually banishing beforehand. There is a circle that the magician stands in that nothing can penetrate. The demon is evoked outside the circle in the triangle, which also contains the essence of that being, so that they cannot escape and run amok. The other way that people work with demons that has become more popular in more recent times is what often gets termed theistic Satanism. This is basically treating the demon like they're your friend, like any other god that somebody would devote themselves to and would try and have a direct, open relationship to. It's opening yourself up fully to these beings and giving yourself no protection, but also not placing any restrictions on them, but also leaving yourself very open to any way that they might want to influence you. And this is certainly a much less, you could say, authoritarian way of dealing with demons, but it also removes all of the protection that you have from something which you don't know its true intention, and might actually have very malevolent intent, and often does. You know, particularly theistic Satanists, they think that by opening themselves up to these forces, even, you know, letting themselves get a little possessed, that they're going to get power, or they're going to get some amazing experience, but it's just not worth it, because having a demon inside you, so I've heard, is a very unpleasant experience. One of the rituals that I did was the Barzabel ritual, which, if you're unfamiliar with it, involves evoking the demon of Mars, Barzabel. And part of the operation was that one person had to volunteer to be the material basis, so-called. And really what this means is calling the demon into that person so that they could communicate with the rest of the people in the ritual. So I was involved in this ritual. There was one person who volunteered to be the material basis, and I witnessed this person being possessed. It was really unsettling. It was like they were talking, but it was like another person's voice, and it was the way that they were talking. It's like they were speaking, but they were not conscious, almost like the way that a sleepwalker talks. It was just incredibly creepy. So, you know, we had the ritual, and then we banished Barzabel afterwards, and I spoke to this guy, I wanted to see, what was it like to have this experience of being the material basis for Barzabel. He was shook, as they say. He looked like he had just gone through a really terrifying experience, or like he'd been violated in some way. He had that kind of a look on his face, like just completely devastated by what he'd gone through. And I asked him to describe what it was like to have Barzabel inside him. At first, his first response was to just say violent and nothing more, and not be able to explain it any other way. And then he sort of found some more words to express himself, and he said it was like having his mind put inside a blender, and that it was really horrible. Anyway, after the ritual, a bunch of us went to hang out through the night afterwards, and rather than hang out with the rest of us, this guy just wandered off somewhere into the enveloping darkness of the night to be alone with his thoughts, or we don't really know what he was doing, but he was not having a good time. So, when you let these things in, it can really have a negative and corrosive effect on your psychology. I would not recommend it. And once you know the true nature of these entities, as I've come to realize it, you understand why you shouldn't leave yourself open to this kind of influence. And so that's a major flaw of working with the demons in the sort of demonolatry or theistic Satanism kind of a model. But what about this Solomonic or this sort of grimoire-based way of working with the demons? Well, even that has its flaws, because even when you have that protection, even when you're commanding the demon, it can still be unpredictable. It can still be looking for chinks in the armor of your spiritual protection. There's a few ways that can happen. It may not be able to penetrate the circle or the triangle, but it can try and penetrate your spiritual boundaries in other ways. It can sometimes try and convince you to leave the circle. That's one. Or to enter the triangle. That's another. They can also lie to you. They can give you information which is not true, which leads you astray. And you can make them swear to tell you the truth, but that kind of wears off after a while, and they will try their luck again when they feel there's an opportunity to do so. So you have to constantly check them and constantly test them. Otherwise, they will deceive you into doing something which compromises you in some way. And the other way that you can leave yourself open when you're dealing with demons using the Goetia or something like that is if you don't give them what they want in return for helping you. When it comes to the demons of the Goetia in particular, or just any of the sort of demons from these medieval grimoires, with the exception maybe of the Book of Abramelin, there is always a price to pay. There's always a cost of them cooperating with you. Usually this is in the form of a sacrifice that you agree to make. It doesn't have to be something large. It can simply be a physical item, but it's something which, by offering it to the demon as something physical, you're making them feel closer to the material, which is where they want to get, and you're making them feel more real, which is how they want to feel. And if something belongs to them, they feel like they are attached to the physical realm in some way, which is what they're trying to do, because it's a way of moving up and infesting this realm, and making it more like the realm that they come from. But if you promise them something and then you don't deliver on time, you start to get all kinds of like phenomena happening around your house or in your life, things going wrong. It feels like you've been cursed, and you've really opened yourself up to that by entering into this agreement with this entity and giving it a chance to mess with you if it's capriciously not satisfied with what you're giving it in return for its services. And then the other way that these beings can gain an influence over us in a really negative way is simply by the fact that by working with these kinds of entities, you naturally start to attract a certain kind of energy towards you, and it's not a very pleasant energy. Even if you're banishing regularly, it's just not the sort of thing that you need in your life. I remember a few years ago when I was still in my 20s, I decided to experiment with voodoo. It's probably the darkest thing I've ever experimented with. And so I was in the process of preparing something for a voodoo ritual, and I was staying up late that night, and it was about 2, 3 in the morning, and I heard a knock on the door at the unit where I was living at the time. That's very strange. There shouldn't be anybody up and about this time, let alone coming to knock on people's doors. So the whole thing was a bit weird and a bit dodgy. So I just kind of crept around, didn't answer, but crept around to the side window so I could get a look at the person who was at the front door. And I pulled the blinds apart, and I saw this man there, this figure. I couldn't really see any of their features because they were fully covered from the head down with this kind of this hoodie, this hoodie made of this sort of waterproof dark green fabric. It was fully covering their head, so I couldn't see a face. I couldn't see their hands. I couldn't see any of their features, and they were just standing there, just like this, just not moving, like a zombie, just waiting for me to open the door. And the whole thing just was incredibly creepy. I had no intention of finding out who this figure at the door was or what they wanted. The whole situation just had really bad vibes, so I just backed away from the window and just waited for them to leave. But upon reflection, I think that was something negative that was being attracted into my life because of the sort of stuff that I was messing with at the time. You know, when I was younger, I kind of convinced myself that there wasn't too much risk in working with demons so long as it was in a controlled environment. And I also convinced myself that they're actually less evil than they really are. You know, on this second point, I used to have this view of demons that they're kind of just like the spirit rather than the intelligence of a particular planet or whatever sort of energy it is. You know, something like in the system of magic that Agrippa gives. And so in this view, the lower spirit of a particular force or energy in the universe is like a little bit wild, a little bit animalistic. It doesn't follow a moral code, but it's just like a wild animalistic kind of a nature. It's neither good nor evil. And if you just know how to tame it and control it, you know, like you would tame a horse or a dog or something like that, then it can work wonders for you, and it can be used for good or evil. And there's certainly an element of truth to that in the way that these beings work and the way that you can kind of get the upper hand over them and make them do things. But, you know, they're not your friends. Even if you have a more open and less controlling relationship with them than that, they are not your friends. They're not just amoral. There does seem to be some kind of an agenda, some kind of an organized plan that they're all operating behind, which is to the detriment of the human race. That's not to overstate the degree to which the demonic legions or the demonic forces are organized. You know, within the demonic realm, there is a lot of chaos and there is a lot of disorder and there is a lot of infighting between different entities. You just need to think about the Qliphoth, particularly like the realm of the Contenders, for example, the divided realm of Thagirion, to see how so much of the demonic realm is divided against itself and polarized against itself and in a state of internal conflict, much like the political system at the moment, with the two extremes on the radical left and right. And that's some food for thought in terms of what kind of spiritual influence is behind those two political movements. But I'll just leave that there. But even though the demonic is very chaotic and very disordered by nature, there are a couple of principles that sort of unite the demonic realm in terms of what they want to do, what sort of a role they want to play, particularly in the physical world and in the human world. And what they really want is to drag us down to their level. They want to corrupt us. They want to degrade our nature. And in particular, they want to degrade the creative principle within us, the degree to which we're able to use that freely and naturally. So they want to degrade us and corrupt us, but ultimately they want to destroy us. That is what has become very clear to me as I've witnessed the way that they have tried to influence my own life and the way that they have influenced the culture that we're living in. Now that they're out in the open about the fact that they're in control of the culture, it's very easy to see where it's all heading. In a sense, they've kind of overplayed their hand, because now we can see the plan that they have for us in all of its horror, and it gives people a chance to step back and turn a corner and go back to the light, seeing through the deception that they're here to help or to free us, and seeing that they're actually here to destroy us. So what was it that really helped me to realize that demons are dangerous and they shouldn't be worked with at all? Well, it was really as my views on spirituality really started to change significantly, and I became more attracted to the kind of White Lodge, wanting to be a part of the White Lodge rather than the Black, and really making a conscious decision to define myself in terms of the light instead of the darkness, that I really started to see some changes in my life, which indicated that the demonic forces that I had worked with, far from wanting me to just be free and liberated and rebel against the tyranny of spiritual forces, actually didn't want me to change course and to follow my conscience to this new path. They did everything that they could to try and prevent me from going towards the light. There has been a spiritual war waged for my soul between the forces of light and darkness, which I've been very aware of since I was young. There was a time when the forces of darkness got the upper hand, and I was a dark magician, for a number of years throughout my early 20s. But at a certain point, I turned towards the light, and I started to repent for all of the wickedness that I had engaged in before, and have remorse for a lot of the ways that I was before, and the ways that I used magic even, and the philosophies that I held about life, and I began to reform myself to go back towards something that was more what you might call angelic. At the moment that I made that decision, things started to go wrong in my life like never before. And again, like when I forgot to give a sacrifice to a demon in the past, when I had worked with them, it was like I was cursed. Everything was going wrong in my life, whether it was with my car, with my physical health, with my work situation, with my finances, just anything you can imagine. Like every area of life was something bad was happening all at the same time, and it was relentless. It just happened again and again and again. And it was like different people who'd never met each other would all be attacking me as though motivated by a uniform force, by a single agenda. But there was nothing physical uniting them. But there was obviously a spiritual force that was behind that attack. It was radio silence when I was at the lowest point in my life. But the attacks only came when I started to try and aspire towards something higher, to raise my vibrational frequency, to raise my consciousness in a serious way. And there's various ways that they can try and get to you. There's through just bad luck, like situations in your environment where things go wrong. But it can also happen through people, particularly people that are involved in, a way of life, a lifestyle, or even a spiritual belief system that makes them very susceptible to the influence of demonic entities. They can be used like marionette puppets by these entities who can inspire them to attack you for no good reason. Except that, they can see the light within you, and the demons are telling them to try and quash that. For me, I came to realize that many of the sort of political movements that I had associated with in the past and contributed to were motivated by these forces, and realizing that, in fact, they wanted to destroy me, people who are like me, and realizing how evil that is. And I realized as well that the negativity and the really inhuman way of being that was being encouraged by some of the spiritual philosophies that I was interested in. And so I saw more deeply the kind of consequences of the influence of these demonic forces on the world stage, and I realized how evil and destructive it really is. And as I was reflecting on the work that I'd done with demons, I reflected on how for a time they would give me things that I asked for, and that earned my trust in them, and it made me feel like I could rely on them, and that they really were friendly, and perhaps they weren't as evil as I thought. But if I wanted anything that would give me too much power, or would make me too satisfied with my life, they wouldn't give it to me, even though there's no reason why they couldn't. It was within their power to give, and I came to realize that it was because they were manipulating me. It was because they wanted to keep me where I was, not so that I could succeed one day and be their champion, but because they wanted to corrupt and destroy me so that they could take me off the playing board in the coming spiritual war that was brewing on the horizon in our society at this end of a great cycle of humanity. It was never about helping me. It was always about corrupting me. And from that moment on, I knew that I could never work with these demonic forces ever again. Because if we aspire to things that are higher, that take us higher, that make us happier, that make us healthier, more fulfilled, chief of which is going towards the divine, going towards God, we're moving further away from them. And that means that it's harder for them to reach us, and it's harder for them to climb up into the material world through us. And it's harder for them to drag us down to their level like they want to. So that's the agenda, and it's not one that is within your best interests at all. It's not in anyone's best interest. So why not work with demons? Well, first of all, because as I've just explained, they're not your friends. They're not there to help you. Ultimately, even if they help you in the short term, what they really want is to degrade you and destroy you. Just use you up as a way of raising themselves more to the physical level and then discarding you when they're done with you. The second reason is because you don't actually need them. And this is critical, because a lot of people can feel like they need to work with demons simply because they don't have another choice, because they need things in their life. Maybe their work situation or their housing situation is such that it's just not tenable for them to go on as they are, and they need some help. And the only thing that is of a spiritual or magical nature which seems like it can help them is the demonic. But it's simply not true. I understand what it's like to feel like you just need to use practical magic. Like sometimes you just need that extra help, but you don't need to rely on demons to do that. If you want something, just create a sigil. Everything that you need to manifest what you need in life is within you. You have that divine power of creation within you. Nothing else has the power to transform your life like you yourself do. That spark of the divine within you, that creative power that moves the universe, that's all that you need. And that's something you have in ways that demons can only dream of having. So why turn to them? And why rely on something and have something be able to exert influence over whether or not you succeed or fail in life when you can do it all yourself, let alone relying on something which has malevolent intent towards you. So that's it. That's why you don't have to work with demons. There's never any reason why you should, other than morbid fascination, I suppose. But I would strongly recommend against doing so. It might be fun for a while, but ultimately it leads towards destruction. By which I mean self-destruction, chief of all. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it wasn't too preachy, but I really cannot overstate the level of evil that I have come to realize exists in this realm of the demonic. But perhaps you have some of your own comments. Leave them down below if you do. Subscribe to this channel to support my work. Subscribe also to my Odysee account to help me there. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.